Hello, my friend. Welcome to this week's episode of the Happiness Happens podcast. I am Simona, your host, and I'm so excited to have you on with me for another conversation today. Thank you for turning on this episode, and thank you for being here. If you're loving these conversations, I would be so grateful for a review of the show. You can do that on Apple or Spotify, and you can give us 5 stars, and I won't be mad about that. If you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel so that you get notified every single time we have a new episode, every single week, every Tuesday. Okay, I'm excited for this conversation today. We are talking about so many things in the world of mindfulness and how mindfulness helps us build out who we are as human beings, the stories that we accept and believe about ourselves, and ultimately the happiness and joy we find within ourselves due to those stories that we allow people to create for us. Joining me for this conversation today is my friend Marc Ronick. And Marc is a 17-year podcasting veteran and the visionary behind iRonick Media. iRonick Media is a leading podcast production and consulting firm. And he's also the co-founder of NextGen Podcaster, a community that revolutionizes podcasting through bi-monthly training, AI-driven production tools, and exclusive resources. Marc's approach to life and business is holistic, and it's big part of the reason why I asked him to come onto the podcast today. He starts each day with a morning routine inspired by Robin Sharma's 5 a.m. club to focus on personal growth. He is a certified NLP practitioner, and he incorporates neurolinguistic programming and energy work into his coaching, which enriches both his clients' lives and his own. And as you'll hear us talk about on the podcast, Marc and I met through Clubhouse. He leads the room and we co-moderate it with him every single morning, Monday to Friday at 7 a.m. Eastern time. It's called the Podcasting Morning Chat, and you can find the link for that in the show notes below. We cover all kinds of topics from mindset to the latest podcasting news. So I know this podcast episode is not podcast specific, but Marc and I know each other through the podcasting community, and I know you're going to just love him as much as I do. So thanks for joining on today's conversation, and let's get into it. Hi, Marc. Welcome to the Happiness Happens podcast.
Thank you, Simona. Good to be here. Good to see you again today.
I know. Well, we get to see each other every single morning at 7 a.m. Eastern time over on Clubhouse in the room that you lead us through every single morning and that we co-moderate. So I love that.
Me too. And I'm excited to have this conversation because we're used to talking about podcasting all the time. So I'm excited. And you and I behind the scenes often have similar conversations around happiness happens. So I'm really looking forward to doing this officially with you on the show.
I know, me too. I'm so excited. And one thing that I think was very surprising to me, and we'll talk a little bit about it later, but it was very surprising to me when we first met, you are someone who is so deep into mindfulness and all of the things that come with it. So we can talk about that a little bit later, but I was shocked though when I first met you. And because I don't know why, because maybe I just know you from the podcasting space. And then when you get to know people on a deeper level, you actually get to understand their interests and, you know, what lights them up and what they do for fun and all that. So yeah. And then I found that out and I was like, well, Marc just has to come on the Happiness Happens podcast because we have to have that conversation. So yeah.
Well,
anyway, so
cool.
Here we are. Cool.
Yes.
Okay. So let's get into our conversation today, and we're going to talk about happiness. And I'm going to ask you my first question, and this is a question that I ask all of my guests at the beginning of the podcast. It sets the tone of the show, and it is, what does happiness mean to you?
Yeah, and I did know that, so somewhat prepared for this answer.
The only question I prepped you with today.
Yes. And for those who don't know, I like to get the questions ahead of time when I can, because I really like to bring it for the hosts. And so I always come into an interview like this a little bit more nervous than I might normally be, but I'm fine, I promise. And I've thought about this question. So in my experience, I think actually there's a big difference between happiness and joy. And I think that happiness and joy serve different roles, but I do think they're both essential, right? So happiness for me is more situational and often tied to specific events or achievements. In other words, happiness comes from outside circumstances.
Hmm.
For example, it may happen when you close a big deal or when you hit some milestone, like a certain number of downloads or views on your podcast. Happiness ebbs and flows, in my opinion, based on what's happening in life at any given moment, right? So then there's joy. And joy to me it's a collection of inner peace, contentment, and a sense of purpose that stays with you regardless of external circumstances. It's the comfort that you feel knowing you're on that right path, even if you've hit a bump in the road, right? So when my life is, this is my favorite word, and I know you just had Johnny on the podcast, and Johnny and I have talked about this. When life is in harmony,
Yes.
I like to use harmony instead of balance. When life is in harmony, I find that I can access both happiness and joy more easily. The external accomplishments brings me the burst of happiness, while that internal sense of harmony and alignment, that feeds my joy. Right? So the big challenge that I've experienced in my life, and I haven't connected it with it until more recently over the past few years, is I was diagnosed in my early 30s with ADHD. And one of the things about ADHD is typically that means your brain isn't producing enough dopamine. And so in my case, when I'm not sometimes getting the dopamine, sometimes the happiness part, based on my explanation, is more challenging for me. I sometimes have a hard time connecting with those achievements and milestones and getting super excited about them. And so sometimes I will question, am I happy? Am I not happy? So I have to lean on that definition of joy that I shared with you, because I do know I believe I have that inner peace, that contentment that I was talking about. And and having that knowingness kind of keeps me going, keeps that joy alive. So yeah, so I think happiness means more of the external things that go on in your life, and joy is more of that internal feeling.
I love that. I love that. That's beautiful. And you know what's really interesting? Happiness, when I first started trying to understand what happiness was to people, because I was sitting in the spot in my life where I was like, wow, I have everything that I could have ever wanted, but everything feels missing. Like there's things that feel like it's missing. And that was back in 2018 before I even started the show. And then I started to realize that a lot of other people felt the same way, you know?
Yeah.
And it made me question, what is it that we're all looking for, right? And over the years, so we're going on year 4 in 2020. Wait, hold on. 19, 20, 21, you're set. No, that doesn't make any sense. Hold on. When did the show launch? 2019. 2019, 2020. Almost 6 years. No, there's no way. Wow. I'm just I'm like, whoa, hold on. That's crazy. And we're over 200 episodes in. Wow, I just feel like I just aged myself, because I literally thought it was like 2 years ago, but here we are. But in any case, I started to try and understand what people felt like they were missing within them, and what I always felt like was missing within me, right? And so when I started to interview people about happiness and understanding, what brought them to that feeling of happiness or joy or whatever, what in my mind now at this point, I kind of lump them all in together, even though they do have different meanings, but for me, they're all under the same umbrella. And their umbrella that they're under, in my mind, is inner peace. So you said harmony and you said peace. And for me, happiness is inner peace, because without having inner peace, you can't look at those external accomplishments and feel any type of way about them, any positive way about them, because you are stressed out, you are overwhelmed, you are all of the things, right? So I just think that there's a lot of power in that, in understanding the different nuances in the different words. And also something else that I've learned from Johnny over the last little bit is, like, words kind of are just words. You know what I mean? Like, we are the ones who assign meaning to that, right?
Yes, I agree with you, and in some ways disagree in the sense that I also believe that words really have a lot of power behind them. And if we're not careful, if we're not careful, we could be choosing words that disempower, whether it's ourselves in the words that we're using for ourselves or other people. So it's little things. But so yes, I agree with you. But when I'm using a little thing like when people use the word but, okay, when you use the word but and you say, yeah, Simona, your podcast, Happiness Happens, is really good, but there's this one thing I want to show you that I think is going to make it better. Well, what I've done is I've discounted the first part. I've basically told you it's good. And then I'm like, but, meaning like, forget everything I just said.
True.
Right. So instead, if I were to just change the word but to and, well, now I'm still giving you the credit that you deserve for having a great podcast. And I've got some feedback for you. Yeah. Right. So it's sometimes, yes, because words can mean different things to different people. I don't know if you were in the room. We had this conversation recently in our morning room discussions around the word vulnerable. Were you there for that?
I was not.
Okay.
Tell me more.
So when we talk about the word vulnerable, and people like to use that word a lot, and I hear it a lot in podcast spaces and other and personal development, people will often say, thank you for being vulnerable in this conversation, right? Because they're sharing something deep and meaningful to them. But when you look at the definition of that, if you look it up on Google, vulnerable means susceptible to physical or emotional attack or harm. Now, I recognize that when that host is saying, thank you for being vulnerable, they mean it with the best intentions.
Right.
Right. But at the same time, but I do mean but when I say that. when I say with brave, if you use the word brave or bravery, well, now you're empowering that person, right? Because you're now saying brave, meaning the definition, ready to face and endure danger or pain, showing courage. To me, that's such a more empowering statement. You're thanking somebody for being brave, for stepping up and sharing something that might be challenging for them to share publicly. Exactly. Instead of saying, thank you for being susceptible to pain or, or emotional or physical, that doesn't empower them. That, it just kind of acknowledges, yeah, that's a difficult, crappy situation, right? So words, I think, are so important and I think using them is important to, let me rephrase it. I think it's important to use them carefully when you're speaking to yourself and to others.
I really do agree with you. And it's reminding me of the emotion wheel. Like, when you're trying to describe an emotion and you're like, oh, I'm so angry, or I'm so sad, or I'm so happy, or I'm so this, what's the level deeper, right? What are you actually? Are you frustrated? Do you feel, what's the word? Not included. So we look at all of these different emotions that we feel, and it's hard for us to understand, well, I feel upset about this thing, or I feel happy about this thing, but it's so much more than that. It's the different level that emotion brings. And I think once you understand the different levels, then you can understand a different awareness. What I learned through this, Mark, too, through this journey of podcasting and understanding what happiness means and all of that, is how many people really don't understand it at all. And it's nuanced, right? Of course you're not going to understand it fully. But there's one scenario that sticks out specifically for me. So I was on Instagram and I was looking at this post, and it was a post that was fully, the comments were fully charged with all kinds of emotion, right? And I know better, okay? I know better than to go and reply and where do you want to put your energy and invest your energy and all that kind of stuff. And I replied back to this person's comment about happiness. They had said happiness, the only way to find happiness in this world right now is to have money. And I replied back and I said, well, I actually disagree with you fully. And I kind of gave a little bit of an answer. And then he replied back and he said, well, you obviously don't have any money. And I just like, I literally think you've missed the whole thing,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
It was just a very interesting scenario. And so, in your own, journey through mindfulness, like we talked a little bit about it at the beginning. Was this something that was always like present for you in your life, or is this something that you discovered a little bit later on? And like, yeah, I'll start there.
Yeah. I don't think I realized how much it was a part of my life all through my life. And I think, though, it wasn't until I read the book, this was like 5-6 years ago, the book for the Four Agreements, that really unlocked something for me. At least it unlocked this path that I decided to go down. Yeah, so I think once I did connect with it, then it's, that awareness, and then it's always around. I'm always present to, or I'm always noticing it, or when I'm not being mindful.
Yeah.
But I think that it took some influence in my adult life to really connect with that.
Interesting. What were some of the things that you did to try and do that?
Well, I think reading was one of them.
Hmm.
I was never a big reader, and my wife, at the time we were dating, but my wife was introduced to that book. And when I read that, and she encouraged me to read it. So that was definitely the beginning. And then one of the next books I read was The 5 a.m. Club, and that helped me with a morning routine, and really designed to have that mindfulness first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
Right? So it's getting up in the morning early before most people are getting up, right? So that's eliminating a lot of distractions. And there's kind of a magic to getting up before sunrise. I didn't believe that until I actually went through it. But I really didn't believe it. But there's a magic to it. And like I said, the distractions alone, you just keep your phone on do not disturb, and you're fine. You're not, nobody's urgently trying to get to you at 5 a.m, right? So you can kind of put things aside, and then you spend time on you. You spend your first hour of the day on yourself, doing physical activity, some kind of exercise, to not just get you up and awake, but it also releases a lot of those chemicals in that your brain produces to get you in that more mindfulness state. And then from there, then it's a practice of meditation, journaling, a combination, some of that real mindfulness type activity. And then the last pocket is to actually do something. It's to do something toward your personal growth, your business growth, something that you can give at least 20 minutes to, that you can sit down, that's going to help you grow in some way. That could be reading a book. It could be working on the course that you're studying. But it's putting those three pieces together in the first hour of your day. And I started that right before the pandemic, I think February of 2020. And I've been doing it ever since. Do I take a break here and there? Sure. Like if I'm on vacation, I'm not as big of a stickler about getting up at 4:45 in the morning, but I'll still try to incorporate those practices when I can. Ultimately, yeah, I'm doing them at least 5 days a week. I'm doing this routine, and it's helped me so much with my mindfulness and my confidence, because I don't think many of us really do take that hour of a day and dedicate it to ourself, and give ourself some time, some praise, some recognition, and some growth. And if you just stop and think about that for a minute, it's like, wow, if everybody did that, and just your first hour of the day, if we all spent it that way, what kind of world would we be living in right now? I think it would be a pretty awesome world.
I think so too. I absolutely think so too. Is this still something that you practice today? Because it's one thing to just start something like this, and then it's a whole other thing to actually continue to show up for it every single time, every single day, every single week, whatever. Do you do it on the weekends too?
I'm flexible.
Okay.
I don't get up that
Okay.
early in the
I was going to
weekends.
say
No.
4:45 on the weekend, Mark. I don't know about that.
No, I don't.
But I definitely hear you. And like, I'm someone who now I wake up early, not naturally, but I make myself wake up because I want to have that hour to myself. And whatever I'm doing in that hour before I start working, then that's that, right? And it allows you, I think, to be a little bit more productive in your day because you've started out your day with so much intention and with
Yeah.
doing so much stuff that you probably wouldn't have to begin with. That said, I think it can be really hard for people to do something like this and stay consistent with it. And one thing that for my own self, and you tell me your experience with this, for my own self, I had a really hard time continuing to show up for myself every single morning because the routine started to feel routine. And then it
Mm.
wasn't until somebody else said to me, you don't have to do the same thing every single time you wake up. Like you can change it and you can do different things. So, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I agree. I don't believe, I do believe there is no such thing as one tool that's going to work for everybody.
Yeah.
Right. So for somebody, that 4:45, that's the time my alarm first goes off. That may be a non-negotiable for somebody. And if that's
Mhm.
the case, fine. I mean, I believe anybody can make that work, but that's okay. We'll go with that. You can't do it. But so what time can you do where
Mm.
you'll get up in the morning and have the least amount of distractions and that you can dedicate that hour of time to? Also, to your point, yeah, if the routine starts to feel monotonous, I agree. It's time to change things up because you don't want to get to a point where it's, you're just kind of hemming and hawing. Okay,
Mm.
here I go again. I mean, that's not the idea of mindfulness at all. So yeah, change it up a little bit. It could be as simple as just changing up your workout routine for
Mhm.
those first 20 to 30 minutes. Could be, okay, I've been doing meditating every single day. Maybe I want to change this up and do some journaling, or maybe I want to mix that up and I'll
Yeah.
only half the time I'll do meditation, the other half I'll read. But yes, I think changing it up is important and I actually think changing it up also does create new neural pathways in your brain. If you are doing different things, your brain is getting exercise, right? If
Yeah.
you're challenging yourself to do something a little different than you did it yesterday, your brain does create new neural pathways. And like I said, it gives it that exercise, it keeps it healthy.
Mm.
So I would encourage to change things up every so often.
That's a really great point. So, one thing that someone could be thinking about right now is like, okay, this is great. Like, mindfulness is great and all of that stuff is great. And building these new neural pathways, like, that's all great. But, like, how does this lead to overall, happiness in your day to day life? But I think it just adds to your inner peace, you know?
Absolutely. And, you know, people oftentimes seek outside stuff for that
Hmm.
happiness, right? Whether maybe it's a relationship, right? But ultimately, if you're working on you, you're going to have a better relationship. You're going to
Hmm.
find the people that you're hoping to attract and create relationships with if you are in your best state of mind. So yeah, I think if you are constantly working on yourself, your world around you changes. Even if what it's probably doing is it's simply changing your perspective, the way you see the world. And if you are stuck feeling like woe is me, that's all you're going to keep seeing.
Hmm.
Your brain is wired to look for the things that you're focusing on, right? So instead of focusing on all the bad, start looking at what you have good in your life and start being happy about that. And then your perspective change. You start seeing more of the things that make you happy.
Hmm.
So yeah,
That's
that's it.
key.
Yeah,
That is so key. And that I think that's the biggest lesson that I've learned in all of my years of living, and especially the time of this life that I'm in right now. And I think, like you said at the beginning of this podcast, how different would the world be if we all focus that 1 hour on ourselves? And I think about this, how different would my own life be and my own world be if I just had found mindfulness sooner or had, chosen to deep dive into this world earlier. But then I also think on the flip side, like your journey is your journey and it's meant to happen the exact way that it's meant to happen. So you
absolutely.
can't go back and say like, oh, I should have done it earlier. I should have done it, years ago, because that probably wasn't available to you. So if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, but I wish that I knew this so many years ago, but you know it now. And that's the difference.
And I actually had a similar conversation, similar words came out of my mouth recently. Sometimes I look back at being a dad, right? And think about, oh, if I had only done this, then maybe my daughter would be even happier than she is today, right? Or I'll just question different things about the way I had been as a parent. And when I talk about that with my wife, she constantly reminds me, listen, you only knew what you knew back then, and you did the best you can with the knowledge that you had. And that does help me. I mean, look, it doesn't change the past.
Right.
Where, okay, woulda, coulda, shoulda. But I do recognize when I hear that, yeah, of course. Like, I was at my best at that moment, and I only knew how to do what I knew.
Yeah.
Sure, now knowing what I know, I probably would have been a lot different of a parent. Doesn't mean better or worse. It just means I've got more knowledge, and I could apply that accordingly. But ultimately, you do the best you can with the knowledge that you have.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, it gives you this opportunity to change or shift the conversation as you look at it from the viewpoint that you're at now. So you have this awareness of I should have done X, Y, and Z, or if I knew X, Y, and Z, then my daughter could have done X, Y, and Z. Okay, whatever those specific X, Y, and Z's are. LMNOP. No, I'm just kidding. Whatever those specific things are. That said, you can look back on that and be like, hey, I recognize now that when this thing happened, I could have done this and maybe this would have happened. And, we can't go and change the past, but, I want you to know and recognize that I recognize it too. And then, people talk all the time about breaking like generational patterns and all of these different pieces. That key is so important to going back and repairing things of the past, because I'll give you an example too about this, Mark. I had a friend reach out to me from high school, and I haven't talked to her. I talked to her here and there on Instagram. Okay. We talk a little bit back and forth. If you're listening, I'm not going to say your name, but if you're listening, thank you for listening. I love you. So she messages me, and she'll always message me about my podcast and all the things I'm doing in my business. And she'll always say, I'm so proud of you. You've done so many good things, blah, blah, blah. And like we haven't seen each other in years. Okay. And she messaged me the other day and she was like, Simona, I need to tell you something. And I was like, what? And she was like, when we were younger, we were all somewhere and you and I were talking and you had said something out loud to the group and I had responded with, and we were like 16 years old, like 15 or 16 years old. Okay. And she's like, and you had responded with something. And then I replied to you and was like, oh my God, you're so annoying, or something like that. Okay. And she's like, I've been thinking about that all these years and how sorry I am for saying that. And in that moment, I had said, the first thing I said to her was, it is okay. And you don't need to carry that anymore. Like you can put that down, like forgiven, all is forgiven. And then what it made me do was go back to all of the times in my life over the last 15 years, 20 years, whatever, where I thought that I was so annoying. And everybody would think that I'm so annoying. When I walk into a room, they're like, oh, fuck, she's here. You know what I mean? Like that was literally my thought. That was always my thought. You're so annoying and you're so this and you're so that. But I never knew where that thought originated from. And so it could have been something as simple as that gets buried and ingrained in your subconscious, that you take and you carry with you, that impacts your confidence. And had she not said that, I don't think I would have made that connection. I don't think I ever would have made it. And I think I would have gone through the next little bit always feeling like I'm bothering people. And then that also leads to me not wanting to ask people for help, right? You think you're so annoying. I don't want to ask anybody for help. So I'm going to do it and I'm going to bear it all alone. And it's a cycle that I put myself into. And only recently, thanks to you, thanks to friends like you, friends like Amanda in our little circle too, friends like this friend who apologized for this thing that happened so many years ago. It gives you that little bit of permission to figure out who you actually are, and like allows you the chance to explore the story and to explore yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting too that you bring that up, because I actually, just before this interview, I had a call with my coach, and I've been soul searching. Look, my mindfulness and personal growth is an ongoing journey.
Yep.
And I've been trying to get to the bottom of why I seem to have a lack of trust in people. not all people, but particularly if I'm looking for a mentor or looking up to somebody, I quickly stop because I lose trust almost right away in them. And, and it bothers me because I think about it, it's like, why don't I have like a mentor? It doesn't have to be somebody that I actually work with, but somebody I can just look up to, maybe aspire to in some ways. And I don't. And it's because I never trust them. And I've been trying to get to the bottom of it. And I have a story of my childhood in elementary school when me and my best friend were, I don't know, we were probably between 7 and 9 years old. And we found a couple of willing participants, girls, to meet us somewhere in a secret location at recess to kiss. Right. So we would like hide under our jackets and just smooch, like nothing, nothing serious. And
oh my God, that's so young.
yeah. And fast forward, I can't remember if it was a couple days, a week later, but shortly after a few times of doing that, my parents got a phone call from the school. And my best friend and the girls basically ratted me out and put it on me as I was the one who orchestrated the whole thing. And I wasn't. I was just the one that went along with it. Right. And looking back, like that's the first experience I can come up with that was an experience of distrust.
Wow.
And I look, and going back to something I said earlier, I look back now. And of course, it was programmed in my head not to trust. And then all I would do is look for reasons throughout my life of why I can't trust this person, why I can't trust that person. Ooh. And it took this literally about an hour ago, a conversation to release that and recognize that was just a situation. And there are many reasons to trust many people out there. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Oh, that is powerful. And, also, I think that situations like that, as we're, younger and as we're growing up and so on, I feel like sometimes it's the people who go through the most sort of challenging times when they're younger that are the ones that step up and do something magical in the world, because I think that you have all of this sort of desire behind you to make a change. And I have a whole bunch of loaded stories in my mind of, why and we could be here for hours to me sharing all these stories to you. But we can go forever and think about, all of these different stories and how they play out in our lives and in our world. And I know for myself, a lot of my success as a business owner comes from let me show you how I can do it, because you always doubted that I wouldn't be able to. Like, there was always someone in high school who would call me a dumb blonde. You're a dumb blonde. You're dumb. You're not smart. You're stupid, this and that, whatever. And it was like my mission to prove and be like, but look what I can do. Mm-hmm. And then what's great about that mentality is you push yourself. And then what's not great about that mentality is you can often find yourself alone in these thoughts and feelings and emotions that you don't quite understand, and you don't exactly know why they exist. Yeah. And at the same time, form and shape so much of our reality and our perception. And so when people talk about the stories that we tell ourselves, right, these stories are ingrained and created by people outside of us that we then internalize into who we are.
Or and it may not even be,
and it may not even be true. And you build this whole life of shoulds, and then you find yourself unhappy, and you wake up and you're like, what the heck did I build my life into? None of it was what I really wanted. And then you find mindfulness, and then you find yourself,
Yeah, absolutely. And, our brains are most impressionable at that young age. Mm-hmm. And I think they say it's, from 0 to 7-ish or so. And I don't think that's a hard number for everybody, but around those years is when we're most impressionable, and we carry that stuff and we live off of that stuff. That becomes our reality, our perception of reality. So it takes something like mindfulness, personal growth, whatever we want to call it. It takes that kind of stuff to help you recognize that those things aren't me. Those things are the reality I experienced at the time, and I'm living that program. So ultimately, if those moments like we shared today, if those things can, in a snap, program our brains, why is it so hard for people to accept the idea that in a snap, we can change our brains in another direction with a more positive thought, right? In my opinion, that is possible to do. We can change our perception, our thoughts in a snap. It's just a matter of whether or not we're ready to believe that we can change that. And once you believe that, then the change is easy, and then you can really experience any kind of life you desire.
I love that. I love that. I think that is so beautiful. And I am someone who is adverse to changing the story of my life. And it's funny because I've made a lot of changes in my life over the last year, and all I hear from people is, "Oh, you're so brave, and what you did was so hard." And it didn't feel hard for me. It felt like honoring exactly who I am and exactly this path. And if you don't like it, then I'm sorry. You know what I mean? I'm sorry for you that you don't like it. I'm not sorry for me. I'm
Yeah.
not sorry for living my truth for the first time in my entire life after years of someone telling me how to live, but I think it really, really, really has to do with a level of confidence in yourself and trust in yourself that you're always making the right decisions, right?
100%.
Love
I'm
that.
with you.
Thanks. Marc, I'm going to ask you my last question, and it's a question I've been asking it for the last 4 years on this podcast. I've asked every single guest on the show, and it is, what can someone do today? What can our listener do today to create a little bit of happiness in their day, every day, starting today?
Awesome question. I think it's to find one routine, one habit that you have heard works for somebody else that you love and or respect. So it could be to start picking up meditation or journaling, or maybe it's a morning routine. Find something that you think works for you, and then commit to doing it for 66 days in a row. And why do I say 66 days? Because I learned this from the 5 a.m. Club book. 66 days, there was a study done at the University of London that showed that if we do the same thing every day for at least 66 days, it becomes a habit. A habit is instilled. So that's why I'm going to encourage, try to do this for 66 days and stay committed to that. If you don't do it on day 10, 30, 50, start over and go back to day 1, because we want to install this habit. We want to reprogram. And I think it does two things for you. One, the habit itself, whether, let's just say it's meditation for this discussion. If you're meditating every day for 66 days, I believe you're going to notice a difference. And B, you're doing this every day, and you are committing to yourself. And when you follow through on the commitments to yourself, talk about finding happiness and joy. Because most of us are quick to commit to other people and follow through on those commitments. And we're very willing to put ours on hold. And that will wear you down. That will eat you up inside. Yeah. So you're doing yourself a favor by making that commitment of 66 days. And then you're also instilling that habit at the same time.
Beautiful. Marc, thank you so much for being on my podcast today.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Of course. And can you tell our listeners where they can connect with you?
Sure. On Instagram, Marc Ronick, MarcRonick. And you can find all the other things that I'm doing on my website at iRonickmedia.com. That's IRONICK.com.
I love it. Such a good company name. I love it so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Marc.
Thank you.
Thanks. And thank you so much, everyone, for tuning into this week's episode on the Happiness Happens podcast. Be sure to connect with both of us. Let us know how you loved our conversation today, what resonated with you today, and just maybe one big aha or takeaway that you absolutely loved, because I know Marc wants to hear from you, and I know I always love hearing from you. So thank you in advance for doing that. I hope you have an amazing week ahead. And remember that happiness happens when you're least expecting it.